Hello everybody and welcome to the first ever episode of The Shelf. This series I'm hoping will supplement my video essays, or perhaps surpass them. That'll be fine, I'll be okay with that. It's just going to chronicle my book reading adventures. I've already read quite a few books. I do wish I'd started this series when I was free. Unfortunately I didn't. So here we are at the age of 23 and we're at the first part, so hooray. This part will be focusing on one of my favourite authors of all time, and despite that grandiose title, I've only actually read one of his novels and 6 short stories and a ton of dribbly aphorisms here and there. But the book I will be covering today is this rendition of the Metamorphosis and Other Stories. This is the version commissioned by Schocken Books. I think that's how you pronounce it. I really hope it is. I actually saw this for the first time when I went and visited the Franz Kafka Museum in Prague, and it was a wonderful experience. I wanted this edition straight after, so I ordered it on Amazon. I haven't got around to reading it yet. However, I have read the Metamorphosis, and I have read a couple of other stories featured in this book, so I will be rereading those for the second half of this video, which will be my summarization of the experience. Looking at the contents now, we've got that is reversed. I'll either fix that or it'll be reversed. We've got meditation, or also known as confessions, I think, which is a collection of one-page dribbles, one-page quick snapshots into Franz Kafka's psyche, which are really interesting. Some of them are very interesting. I, in general, don't love them. You've got the Judgement. I will talk about it later, but it is one of the most important of Franz Kafka's works if you want to study him as a person, in particular his relation to his father. Then we've got the Metamorphosis, a beast unto itself. I'll try and cover it to the best of my knowledge and scholarly wit, but I will not be able to cover all of it, and again, I don't think Franz Kafka could even cover all of it. We've got A Country Doctor. I've read a couple of the chapters or little stories in here, like Before the Law, which is featured in The Trial, which is a masterpiece. Actually, I'm just going to pause here. The reason why I haven't read that much Franz Kafka is he died 100 years ago, and once I've read all his books, I've read all his books. That's it. You can reread it, and each reread will definitely provide something new. I don't want to absorb all of it all at once and then leave myself wanting more of this Kafkaesque experience, the OG Kafkaesque experience. I've read some of the In the Penal Colony. A Hunger Artist is brilliant, one of my favourite Franz Kafka stories. I might like it more than Metamorphosis, to be honest. It's very simple. And that's it. There are a couple of small short stories here and there, and I will go over them. I'm hoping to cover to the best of my abilities each story contained within this book. So I will see you when I'm dressed totally different, perhaps in a day or two, maybe in a week, whenever I can get around to finishing this book. As I said, Franz Kafka in particular, some of the stories I don't want to just, take it and then it's gone forever. So I will try and savour this. For all I know, you may hear from the second half of this video may be me in a month from now. So I finished Meditations, or Confessions. It was the first Franz Kafka book he had ever published. It was 1913. I say that a lot of his works were published posthumously by his close friend Max Brod. Franz Kafka requested they all be burnt and destroyed after his death, tuberculosis, and Max Brod did not do that. Whether or not Franz Kafka would ultimately have liked Brod's decision is a moot point. We have all the work now, and a lot of it is fantastic. So, either way, Meditations is a mixed bag in general. It contains about 16 short snippets, I would call them, into a person's psyche. They detail little psychological exchanges or simply sombre and introspective musings on the world. There are three stories in meditation I want to highlight in particular that stood out to me. I'll go over one briefly now, and that was Children on the Country Road. I read this for the first time about 5 years ago, and I will say I skipped over Children on the Country. I didn't literally skip over it, but it didn't jump out to me at all. And I think I'm older now, and I enjoy it a bit more. And I might enjoy it more the older I get. It's about 2.5 pages of a little child. We don't know what gender, we don't know what age, so you can connect with them more, I presume. Being a child. It's very innocent, playful, and written by Franz Kafka in particular. It does have a tinge of sadness to it. I'm not fully well versed in his childhood, like the specifics. I don't think anyone's completely well versed in the specifics of his childhood. I know about his father and his family dynamic and a couple of his friends and his education, but as a child, we don't really know. So reading this a year and a half after going to the Franz Kafka Museum, it did feel a bit sadder, I will say. Now, one of the other stories I want to talk about, maybe my favourite one in Meditations, is called The Sudden Walk, and it's a page long, so I'm going to try and read it in its entirety, and I'm more than certainly going to stumble, and I'll explain why at the end if you don't guess. So, when it looks as if you had made up your mind finally to stay at home for the evening, when you have put on your house jacket and sat down after supper with a light on the table to the piece of work or the game that usually precedes your going to bed, when the weather outside is unpleasant so that staying indoors seems natural, and when you have already been sitting quietly at the table for so long that your departure must occasion surprise to everyone, when, besides the stairs are in darkness and the front door locked, and in spite of all that you have started up in a sudden fit of restlessness, changed your jacket, abruptly dressed yourself for the street, explained that you must go out, and with a few curt words of leave-taking, actually gone out, banging the flat door more or less hastily according to the degree of displeasure you think you have left behind you. And when you find yourself once more in the street with your limbs swinging extra freely in answer to the unexpected liberty you have procured for them, when as a result of this decisive action you feel concentrated within yourself all the potentialities of decisive action, when you recognise with more than usual significance that your strength is greater than your need to accomplish effortlessly the swiftest of changes and to cope with it, when in this frame of mind you go striding down the long streets, then for that evening you have completely got away from your family, which fades into insubstantiality, while you yourself, a firm, boldly drawn black figure, slapping yourself on the thigh, grow to your truest stature. All this is still heightened if, at such a late hour in the evening, you look up a friend to see how he is getting on. Possibly the most simple thing Franz Kafka's ever wrote, and yet it requires some analysis. All it is detailing the desire to stand up and leave oneself, to walk away from your environment, and to conquer change, to conquer your environment and become at one with it psychologically. At the beginning, the nameless black shadowy figure, again, a lot of meditations lends itself to you being able to project yourself onto the protagonist. I'm saying he for me. He obviously isn't happy with his environment. He's obviously not happy with his family. He's not happy with his work or games. I mean, the first two things referenced are, he's about to either do something for fun or do something for work. Neither of those two options are appeasing to him. Spending time with his family is not appeasing to him. He needs to get out and he needs to leave. I think the last sentence in particular, the looking up a friend, it gives the protagonist a sympathetic weakness, a vulnerability, and also projects the idea that he does want companionship. There is something more than this walking, this change of environment and change of temporary lifestyle that could make him happy, and that would be looking up a friend. One thing in particular, the whole story, minus the last sentence, is written as one long sentence. There's no full stop whatsoever, just comma after comma after comma after comma. Kafka's famous for his long-winded, tangential prose, and it's just one sentence. You breathe, he's outside, cool air, fresh air, and that is the thing. As you're reading, you lose breath and you feel the suffocation that the character is feeling, and by the time you're reaching the last couple of sentences, you're rushing it out, it's coming out, but then he's outside, and the sentences do shorten, and the words become shorter, and it's suddenly much easier to read and to breathe. Then you breathe. Next sentence. It could be better if you went and looked up a friend. I like it. I like it a lot. So the second short story or aphorism from Meditations, Confessions, is Passers-by. And so I'm going to read this because it's even shorter than the last one. When you go walking by night up a street, and a man, visible a long way off, for the street mounts uphill and there is a full moon, comes running towards you, well, you don't catch hold of him, not even if he is a feeble and ragged creature, not even if someone chases, yelling at his heels, but you let him run on. For it is night, and you can't help it if the street goes uphill before you in the moonlight. And besides, these two have maybe started that chase to amuse themselves, or perhaps they are both chasing a third. Perhaps the first is an innocent man and the second wants to murder him, and you would become an accessory. Perhaps they don't know anything about each other, and are merely running separately home to bed. Perhaps they are nightbirds. Perhaps the first man is armed. And anyhow, haven't you had a right to be tired? Haven't you been drinking a lot of wine? You're thankful that the second man is now long out of sight. I love this story. So let's look at it from a literal sense of a literal paradigm. First of all, it starts with a protagonist walking down the street and he sees a guy approaching him. We've all been there. It's the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, or the flight or fight response just kicking in high gear, and he starts imagining, he starts thinking, his mind goes whirling, and he starts perceiving all these alternate outcomes as to why this guy's running. Is he trying to get to bed? Is someone chasing him? Is he armed? Is the guy following him armed? All of these scenarios running through his head, and before he knows it, oh, he's gone. I mean, it's written in the third person. It's written, second person. It's written to you. You are the character in this. So, I mean, the whole thing I was talking about projecting yourself, this in full blast here. So, see, what's interesting about this aphorism is you can look at it from the literal angle, which is very pertinent, and I felt like it necessarily had to be written, that encounter every human has. But there are so many things that you get worried about or you see on the horizon coming up in the future, and your brain can't stop thinking about it, thinks it's the most important thing ever, contemplates every dire situation, and then you do it. And there are so many situations in my life where I forget that I'm anxious the moment before doing it, feel a bit of anxiety mixed with excitement, do it, and then carry on my life and forget that I ever cared. A bit like this guy who will go home after drinking a lot of wine, fall asleep, and forget about this encounter altogether. And having looked into Franz Kafka as much as I have to say I think it's discussing anxieties or the future. I love it. It's my favourite from Meditation. So that's Meditations and Confession. I will next be reading The Judgement and discussing that. The Judgement is brilliant, so I'll have a lot to say about that, and I'll see you in a second, I guess. So, I just read The Judgement. I've read this one before also, and reading it for a second time was very illuminating. So I'll detail the story first, as briefly as I can. There's a main character called George. He lives with his father, who is bedridden and sick. Think Grandpa Joe from Willy Wonka. That's what I imagine. 3 years ago, his best friend moved to St. Petersburg in Russia, and they keep contact via letters. However, George's life has become one of misery and boredom as he attends to his father for the majority of his time. Now, George is engaged to someone who obviously mirrors someone personally in Franz Kafka's life. I'll get into that later. but the initials FB do appear quite a lot throughout Franz Kafka's work. This FB, this one, she isn't a prominent character. She's not really in it at all. She just expresses her dismay at the fact George has yet to tell his close friend in Russia the news of their marriage. Now, the relationship between the two friends, I would say, is a weird dynamic. George had expressed the death of his mother, and his friend kind of brushed it aside, not fully feeling the impact of the situation, and a similar sort of thing happens throughout their letter writing to one another. He writes a letter to his friend detailing the soon-to-be wedding between him and FB. And as he is about to leave to post the letter, he walks into his father's room, who is lying in bed underneath his sheets in his gown, and they have a small discussion. And the father asks George, "Where are you going and what are you doing and stuff?" And George says, "I'm sending a letter to my friend who lives in St. Petersburg." His father calls him a liar, and his father says, "You don't have a friend. Stop lying to me. Stop mocking me. Stop pulling my leg." And George replies. See, that's the thing about George. George replies, but he never fully stands up for himself. Not fully, a bit like Franz Kafka with his own father. So he kind of tries to laugh through the situation, and also prove that he does have a friend. And he finally manages, after a bit of a bout of mania from his father, he finally manages to convince him that he does have a friend indeed. However, his father turns tact and starts accusing him of lying about the marriage also, and that he isn't really marrying someone, and further on says, basically just calls him a selfish, ungrateful human being. So now you know what else there was in the world besides yourself. Till now you've known only about yourself. An innocent child, yes, that you were, truly, but still more truly have you been a devilish human being. And therefore take note, for I sentence you now to death by drowning. And George feels the guilt so intensely that he rushes out of his room, brushes past a cleaning lady who screams Jesus, startled, and throws himself off the bridge into traffic. Now, before we get into the meat and potatoes of this roast dinner of a short story, it's interesting to know that his father repeatedly insinuated that he doesn't care about people, and we're inclined as a reader, and because of the absurdity of the situation, to feel that George is in the right, that his father's being unreasonable and wrong and selfish and weird. At the same time, he does immediately follow up this judgment by running out the room and brushing past a woman, nearly sending her flying while she's holding things and not apologising. So, these characters are given, this is all the screen time they get, and we have to judge them for each scene that they're in. And the only scenes we get of George are him telling us that he has a friend, of him telling us that he's married, based on he recalls a conversation with FB, but again, we don't actually know the truth of the matter. His father could see, this is the ultimate gaslighting story, because neither of us, neither the reader, the father, or George seem to know the truth here, and I think that is the kind of the point of the short story. It's if it has a point at all, I have no idea what I just read, but I feel like I know what I just read, and I'll have to reread it again to fully know. But reread it as many times as you want. I don't know if there's a definitive answer to this small short story. It's just a fascinating one. It's very concise, and it encapsulates on everything that makes Kafka's work so charming and horrible to read. And I will be moving on to the next one, which will be The Metamorphosis. This will be my 4th time reading it, and I will try to look at it from an esoteric angle as there's a breadth and depth of knowledge, breadth and depth of research related to Metamorphosis out there. I'm going to try not to do some research on this. I want to give a unbiased recollection of the story immediately after I read it. So thank you for joining me for this one, and I will see you again in a second. I keep closing out these videos as if the video's ending.